Already, we are in Unit 2. We're still in Period 1, 1491 to 1607. And this one is all about reasons for exploration and colonization. Let's go. One of the reasons for exploration that we don't really think about is the Crusades. So, as men were traveling from country to country to go over and fight in the Crusades in Jerusalem, they were seeing new things and experiencing new things, buying new things, bringing them home, and their wives were thrilled. So, those Crusades and the meeting of new places and seeing new things gave them a taste for the things they found along that path, like spices and silk, jewels, different types of decorations for your home. So it gave them an idea that there were things in the world that they didn't know about, and it gave them a curiosity to go and get them. It also made people realize that if they could figure out something that they could produce themselves, they could sell it to foreign people who did not know this thing existed until they showed it to them, just like what had happened to them when they went on the Crusades. So it's new markets. But one of the bigger things that the Crusades did is it broke that Muslim domination of trade, and so now the door is wide open, and Europeans can now take leadership in trade because the Muslims were knocked out of the picture. There were also new tools that were developed because of the Renaissance, and it made people feel safer if they were going to travel to a place where they couldn't see land. It gave them a sense of safety, being able to figure out where you were. So the first tool that we're going to talk about is a sextant, and that is the first picture that you see in the white down here. That's a sextant, and a sextant allows you to figure out time and place. Okay, using the stars. So you figure out what time of day it is and what place you are, and it helps you plot your path. How long did it take me to get here? So time and place. On the right hand side over here, you see a tool called an astrolabe. That's actually a Muslim invention, and an astrolabe allows you to figure out longitude and latitude. So you know exactly where you are. So a sextant tells you when you are, an astrolabe tells you where you are. Does that make sense? Okay. We also have things coming out of the Renaissance that has to do with money. So for the first time, we have a brand new invention called financial institutions, and the number one invention being under that being the joint stock company, where separate people come together and create this one viable entity with money that they share from each other into this one pot. The great thing about it is if the company goes down in a joint stock company, it crumbles, it goes away. You as a stockholder have limited liability, which means you can only lose what you put in. So if your joint stock company owes somebody $1 million and it crumbles, do you owe this person $1 million? No, you don't. You don't owe them anything. You can only lose what you put in. So if you put in $1 million, you could lose it, but you're not going to lose anything beyond what you actually put in. You can also sell your shares to somebody else, and nobody can tell you you can't. So you're this individual entity, and you stay an individual entity, but as a group, you have the opportunity to do fantastic things and make lots of money if you do it right. It also, the Renaissance, once again, made people curious through propaganda. People are writing these fantastic articles about new places and new ideas and new books and new everything, and people are starting for the first time since before the Black Death, starting to really, really want to know what's out there because propaganda makes it sound like such an adventure to go to a new place. All right, so we also, of course, have religion, right? Gold, God, and glory. That's why we went to explore. So the church officially gave people permission. This is Christopher Columbus, by the way, and we'll get to him in a minute. They were officially, though, given permission by the church to go explore and basically take over whatever you wanted to take over. So there was a doctrine. It was a papal bull, which means the Pope did it. It was a doctrine created by the Pope, Pope Alexander VI in 1493, and this papal bull was labeled the Doctrine of Discovery. And this is what it said: any land not inhabited by Christians was available to be discovered, in quotes, and claimed. It does not say that it cannot be done with violence, does it? It actually kind of infers that you can do whatever you want to do to claim it. So it is truly considered by historians to be one of the most wicked doctrines, evil doctrines to ever come from a pope. And so it gives people permission to go to new lands and terrify and just kill whoever they need to kill to turn them into Christians or take the land away from them so that the land is ruled by Christians. Ridiculous. All right, so let's see if you can define Columbian exchange. This is another reason for exploration. Remember, when you're defining a word, you can't use the word in the definition. So it's kind of hard not to use the word exchange in that definition, but don't. So the Columbian exchange really was a discovery of new markets and new goods. So people decided to sell their belongings, what they made, to other places in order to have the right to buy things they had never seen before. So this is going to change everybody's world. So who gave who what? In Africa, of course, Africa is going to eventually end up giving slaves, mostly to North and South America, mostly North America. They also gave ivory and gold in quantities never seen before. Africa herself gets some pretty wicked things, alcohol for one, and guns. So Africa is going to be changed forever and forever and forever. Now, one of the things that we seldom think about when we talk about slavery in Africa, it changed the population completely, completely, completely. Because if you are a slave trader, are you going to go over to Africa and pick the weakest people? Of course you're not. You're going to pick the strongest, the prettiest, the most virile, the most intelligent. And so the people that they were capturing literally in nets were the best of the tribes that they invaded. And so Africa's population is not only diminished, but the population that is left behind is not the strongest and the most intelligent. So Africa is going to struggle in a lot of ways. And now they have weapons too, and they don't really tend to use them on foreign powers. They start using them on each other. And so Africa is not doing well, and they're drinking on top of that. So Africa did not make out very well in the Columbian exchange. Europe, on the other hand, got lots of great things from America, especially. They ended up getting corn, certain types of coffee, tobacco for sure. So those are the three big ones. There's lots and lots of stuff that I could tell you, but those are the three big ones. Now, what do the Americas get? The Americas get from Europe, they get for the very first time, I already told you about what they get from Africa. America for the first time gets horses. Sorry, my mind went blank. They get horses for the first time. So natives had never had horses before. And so the Spanish actually brought them over for the first time. Dandelions is another one. Dandelions used to be the only spice that Europeans had to spice their food, and so everyone grew dandelions to use as spices. So there were fields and fields of them everywhere in Europe. And when they came over to America, that the seeds of those dandelions were in the cuffs of their pants, and they would eventually make their way out. And so now America has a terrible problem with dandelions in the spring. And you can still use them as spice. It's kind of bitter, but my grandmother used to actually rub dandelions on pot roast. So it just has kind of this bitter taste. I didn't like it, but it was the only real spice that we had. But of anything that Europe gave to the Americas, you have to say that the most detrimental and the one that affected America the most was smallpox, disease in general, but smallpox specifically. There are guesstimates anywhere from 50 to 90% of the population of natives was wiped out by smallpox. So major, major impact on on the natives here in America. So the environment did not do well in a lot of these situations. Basically, and this is mostly Europeans, they just raped the land wherever they went. They didn't worry about refortifying it. They didn't know how to be honest. They grew crops like sugarcane and tobacco eventually that are really, really hard on the land. And so there were places that eventually couldn't grow anything because we overtaxed it. And of course, Europeans are looking for gold and silver. So if they weren't taking the land to put these detrimental crops on, they were digging the land and just leaving it open and scarred, looking for gold or silver or whatever. The psychological impact was humongous. I mean, you have the people in Africa who are devastated by losing their top echelon of people as far as intelligence and power. So that's completely, I mean, that would mess with you, of course. And then the psychological impact of the natives, that they're watching everything they love just crumble almost overnight. Everyone they cared about is now dead from smallpox. Their villages are being burned. They're being run off the land that they've known all their lives. Psychologically, how do you cope with that? So big, big differences across the world because of the Columbian exchange. So when we talk about colonization and you look at the maps of early colonization, you notice that the West is left unclaimed for a really long time. There's a good reason for that. It's so arid in that part of the continent that nobody knew how to farm it. And so it kind of became the belief that you're setting yourself up for failure if you go beyond where you see the blue line. So it kind of became this unwritten rule that the French would go north, the Spanish would go south, and then the British would end up taking over the eastern shoreline. So the blue that you see here, that's France, it actually starts with the St. Lawrence River in Canada, and then they kind of work their way behind the British. But it's not like they sat down and worked this out. It was just that they were trying to stay out of each other's way. They had enough confrontation with the natives that they had to remove, and so why start a war with another country to take this new place over? And so they just didn't. So the West is left unclaimed. The French go north, the Spanish go south, and the British take over the eastern shore. Let's talk about the Spanish for a minute because they are one of the top explorers during this time period. And the reason is because they use their religion for it. So, Catholic conversion is supposed to be the number one priority of Catholics back then. If you're Catholic, you're supposed to go out and spread that doctrine and bring others into the fold. And so, suddenly they have this giant, giant group of others, and they're going to come over to this part of the world, North and South America, and start converting people, the natives. So the real goal, of course, was something that the Spanish had heard was in abundance in North and South America, especially northern South America, and so much so that between these years, 1545 and 1660, they delivered 7 million pounds of this to Europe. Any guesses? Any guesses? It's not Catholics. It's not 7 million pounds of Catholics. It's 7 million pounds of silver. So that was really the goal when they sent people over here, because people aren't coming as individuals. Mostly they're coming as the government asking them to go do this or paying them to go do it. So how do they get the silver? Of course, they enslave the natives. So they set quotas, and if you didn't meet your quota, then they would do terrible, awful things to you. If you were old enough to hold a shovel, you were old enough to have a quota. So lots of people lost their lives digging for these 7 million pounds of silver for the Spanish conquistadors. Let's look a little closer at Spanish colonization again because they were one of the superpowers. One of the worst things about Spanish colonization is that the government was set up very poorly with layers and layers of bureaucracy, each one being more corrupt than the other one before it. So here's how they set it up, and you do not have to memorize this order that I have over here on the right side of the screen, but I want you to see how complicated it was. So say you're an individual here in South America, and you have a problem with the way that things are being run, and you want change. So locally, you have to go to your town council, and that town council will go to a court of appeal, and the court of appeal goes to the provincial governors, and then the provincial governors go to not one but two viceroys who go to the Council of Spain, and then those people explain the problem to the King of Spain, and he makes a verdict and sends it back down that chain, which it's like a game of telephone. By the time that it gets back to you as an individual nobody in a Spanish colony, nothing's going to go the way that you want it to go. The story's been changed, so the solution isn't right. Like, it just, nothing changed for the better ever because there was too thick of a bureaucracy, all these different people with their hands in the pot, changing the story and changing the solution to fit their needs instead of the person who originally had an issue. They also had labor problems in the fact that the Indians wore their labor and it was forced labor, and they rebelled and they died. So there was a huge labor problem for the Spanish colonies. The treatment of Indians was actually a political right to treat them however you wanted to. It's called encomienda, and an encomienda basically it gives the right of a Spanish conquistador to demand labor and tribute from the natives he captures. So they can basically do whatever they want to get that labor and tribute out of them, and that includes taking body parts, psychologically and physically scarring them, whatever it takes. So, how is this different from African slavery? Number one, the Indians on the encomiendas are not being purchased; they're just being captured. So it's not part of a larger market. There's no sense in buying them because they do die so fast. So nobody's going to buy them. They just capture them. But the natives are not displaced like Africans. Africans are actually removed from their home continent. These natives are not. So it's a little bit different than it would be for an African slave. No better, but different. So let's look at the racial impact. There are some groups that are created that the world had never seen before when the Spanish come over to North and South America. And one group is the mestizos, and that is when the Spanish mix with the Indians. You're a mestizo. You're pretty low on the totem pole. You don't have any rights. You're not supposed to ever hang out with the conquistadors or the viceroys, the people in charge. You are lower class. Even lower than that is a group called the Zambo. And Zambo is Indians and blacks having children and creating a new race. So a Zambo is even lower than a mestizo because there's African blood and native blood, the two groups that they think are super inferior now have a child, which makes that child double inferior to the eyes of the Spanish. So you have two brand new races, the mestizo and the Zambo. And it does create a very complex hierarchy that cannot be changed because the hierarchy is based on your blood, and you can't change your blood. You can't change who you are. So, if the Spanish were so horrible to the natives, did the natives ever try and fight back? Yes, and it became the first Indian revolt in America or the Americas. So, I can't make it as powerful as the video that I'm going to offer for you to watch and learn from. So yes, you do need to take notes from it. No, you can't just click on the link here because this is a video. So you're going to have to freeze it and then copy it into your browser and watch it that way. So it is a very good movie, and it really will help you understand this man by the name of Pope, who had had enough, and he is just absolutely tired of being treated the way that they're being treated, and so he does something about it. And so Please take good notes on it. The legacy of it is one of the things you really, really should be looking for. How does Pope feel about the God the Spanish are forcing upon them? Why did the rebellion start? What was the thing that made Pope say, "That's it, I'm done, I can't take anymore"? That's the kind of stuff you're looking for. So take some pretty good notes. Okay, it's almost 10 minutes. Watch it all. Yay! See you on the next little blurb. All right, so let's talk about the French in North America. The French, I've said this to you before, were here to embellish their fur trade, and they came to realize that women in France really loved beaver. If you've never seen a beaver pelt, it is absolutely beautiful, and it's super super soft. So women wanted those little hand muffs that you put your hand inside. It's like a little tunnel, and you put them inside and keep your hands warm, or the collars of their dresses. They wanted them turned into hats. So women loved beaver. This was not an animal that could be found in Europe. It was brand new to the Europeans, and women would pay top dollar for these for creations made out of it. So these Frenchmen came over here to learn how to trap and tan these mysterious creatures called beavers, and the Indians allowed them to just move in with them. They didn't want their land, they wanted their knowledge, and they were willing to share alcohol with them in order to get the knowledge. Many of them ended up in Louisiana because they wanted a warm water port where they could trade all year round. And so that's how we get that very large population of French still in Louisiana. It started because of beavers. The French wanted beavers. So, because of that population there, a brand new ethnic group is created called the Creoles. And the Creoles are a mixture of all of these together. They're French, they're Indian, they're Spanish, and they're African. But they really keep the predominant history root is French. So even though they have Indian, Spanish, and African in them, these people tend to be very, very French. But their dialect is very, very different. They have a dialect that can be found no place else in the world. So they do have French habits and French food and French history, but they created kind of their own group, one that you can't find anyplace else, and it's very, very noticeable. So let's move on. So there is little motivation for French to colonize North America. Again, they don't want land, they just want knowledge. So the evil, and I've already said this to you, the evil that was created out of this meeting was unintentional, but it is alcohol that was introduced to the natives as a trading tool. Give me your knowledge, I'll give you this stuff, it'll make you feel really good. The French weren't there to turn them into alcoholics, but it definitely did turn the native tribes into alcoholics, where some tribes now are so desperate to get rid of this evil because it has kept them poor and downtrodden for hundreds of years, that they've made a law that there is no drinking whatsoever on their reservations, and you can actually be put in jail or highly fined even if you're not an Indian and they find you on the reservation with alcohol. So Hopi is one of them. The Hopi Indians, no alcohol whatsoever. So they're trying desperately to get rid of that evil that was started hundreds of years ago by the French. So English colonization was much more state-centered in their motivations. They saw an opportunity for military settlements, to have ports all over the world, kind of thing, refuge for surplus population because of the Enclosure Acts. Remember, the Enclosure Acts fenced off land so that people in Europe could start raising more sheep and cattle and animals that were easy to get to market. And so all these people that used to be renting the land that is now enclosed and used as a cage for animals, all those people were displaced. So they're flooding cities and making the cities all over Europe really bad. You know, the higher the population, the more crime, more fire, more sanitation matters. So these people are searching for other places to colonize to get rid of that extra population that came out through the Enclosure Acts. It is a religious refuge. There is religious problems happening all over Europe. Elizabeth I, remember, was not a Catholic. She was a Protestant, and she was changing a lot of the rules of the Protestants and trying to make them more modernized, trying to make them not Catholic, but more in line with the Catholics, so the Catholics and the Protestants weren't fighting as much. Well, that made a lot of Protestants mad, and a lot of Protestants will leave England to get away from her and her new modernized rules, and to practice the way that they want to practice here in America. James the First was also in power, and he was the son of Charles the First, who was the one who was beheaded, remember, because he tried to obliterate Parliament. He allowed both Catholics and Protestants to hurt one another. It was kind of a game for him. So now you have Catholics and Protestants who both will leave England and come to America to get away from that kind of stuff. So Calvinist is a group that has gotten much bigger by the time that English colonization really catches on. But they are really persecuted still. So a lot of Calvinists will come to America, and then you have pilgrims in general. Pilgrims are anyone who is trying to get away from the intoleration of their religion in their home country, and so they go someplace else. And so pilgrims could be Calvinists, they could be Protestant, they could be Catholic. It's people that are defecting from their country to have a freedom of religion. So all of these things are happening in the religious world and convincing people to leave their home countries. All right, so individual motivators, of course, are ones you can probably guess almost every single one of them. Riches, primogeniture, we've already talked about because only the first son gets anything, all the other kids get nothing. Propagandists are spreading those ideas of how fantastic these new worlds are and how easy it is to get stuff from the natives. Indians are also seen as a potential market for English goods, even though that really isn't going to happen, but they're seen that way. And there is also a lot of stuff going on in Europe that's going to convince people to just leave in general, even other than religion. So there is a civil war going on with Oliver Cromwell, and he's hunting down Charles the First. They're going to behead him. It is a scary, turbulent time in all of Europe, but England especially is having a really hard time with leaders and just crazy stuff. Oh. English colonization did not start out very well. There was a English war with Spain, and it really kind of stalled the efforts of the English getting out there and really making an effort to colonize. They didn't really have the confidence to colonize either. So it is there's two people that are fighting one another, and let me kind of take a step back and tell you who these people are. So in England, there was the daughter of Henry VIII. Her name was Mary, and she was known as Bloody Mary because she killed anybody who was not Catholic. It was considered, she had witch trials and everything else that she could do. She burned people at the stake. She hung them from crosses. She killed a lot of people for nothing more than the fact that they were not willing to be Catholic. Well, her husband was Philip II of Spain. So when Mary died, she died from mysterious causes. They think that she had a very large cancerous tumor in her belly. She told everyone she was pregnant, but there was never a baby, and she was like pregnant for 2 years. So we think that she probably had cancer. But anyway, she dies. So her baby sister, Elizabeth I, is now the person in charge of England. And Philip, who is royalty, even though he's not married to Mary anymore because she's dead, but Philip is not royalty in England now that his marriage is gone. He's only royalty in Spain. So he has to go back home. Well, he doesn't want to do that. So he tries really hard to convince Elizabeth to marry him. Well, if you know anything about Elizabeth the First, she's considered the Virgin Queen. She wasn't, but she never needed a man. She never wanted a man. She never got married, never had children. She didn't want any of that. She wanted to prove that she could do it on her own as a woman. And so she didn't like Philip anyway, so she wasn't going to marry the man. So what does he decide to do? He decides to declare war on her, and he ends up sending his ships, the Spanish Armada, to take over England. So you can see the path here on this map. He was going to go all the way around England and take over everything that they possibly could and then make circles and come back around. It was a weird plan. I don't know why he planned it the way that he did. But they were sitting in the English Channel and a storm is on the horizon. And so the captain, the people in charge of the Spanish Armada decided that they would head north to try and avoid the storm. So they're sitting right where you could see Ireland and you can see England. So they're in between the two. So, or the British Isle anyway. So they're sitting in the middle of the British Isles. Okay, so this storm doesn't go in the direction they thought it was going to. It followed them, and so it batters these Spanish ships like crazy, and they end up almost all of them crashing into the shore. Some of them crash into Ireland, some crash into the England. And so, what's left of the Spanish ships is not very much. The English people, under the leadership of Elizabeth, has a wonderful guy by the name of Francis Drake, and Drake is the guy in charge of Elizabeth's navy, and so she sends him out to take over what is left of the Spanish Armada. He does it pretty easily, and so the mightiest navy in the world, the Spanish Armada, is completely destroyed. And so finally Elizabeth and England feels that they are ready to sail the world, and that's what they do. So while the beginning of this war between Spain and England kind of halts that effort of English colonization, in the end, it actually encouraged it because it made them see that their navy and their leaders in the navy were good enough to go explore, and it makes them brave. And so that's exactly what they start doing. So the outcome of the war, you could say, is American colonization by the British. So we have to talk about this guy here. If you're going to talk about colonization and failures, Sir Walter Raleigh. Now, Sir Walter Raleigh was noticed by Queen Elizabeth when he was still pretty young, but she noted him for valor in battle. She heard all these great things about him, and she even knighted him. And she eventually gave him a land grant in America, and they called it Roanoke. So Raleigh in 1587, so this is before our first permanent settlement in 1607. This is 1587. Raleigh sent, what you see in front of you, 120 men, women, and children to Roanoke. The first English baby is going to be born there, and her name is Virginia Dare, Dare. Who is she named after? The Virgin Queen. All right, so 2 years later, he comes back to check on the group. And when he comes back, they are all gone. And the only clue to anything about what happened to them is an engraving on a tree called, and with one word, and it was Croatoan. So these people become known as the Lost Colony. It is a complete failure. We have no idea to this day what happened to them or what Croatoan actually means. Some people say that it was an Indian tribe. Maybe the tribe killed them. Maybe the tribe absorbed them. I mean, the guy hadn't checked on them in 2 years, and it was a new world. They could have been starving and begged to be absorbed into a native tribe. We don't know. So he is kind of losing favor with Elizabeth. Then Elizabeth finds out that he's actually having an affair with one of her ladies in waiting. And you don't do that. Like, you do not mess with the ladies in waiting. The ladies in waiting are supposed to be there for the queen and only for the queen, and they're supposed to stay pure, so that their only worry in the world is taking care of the queen. And now Sir Walter Raleigh has soiled one of her ladies in waiting, and so he is not in favor. She doesn't favor him anymore by the time that she dies. So later in 1603, he's actually going to be beheaded by James the First, because he just went crazy and was like bad mouthing the crown, and I don't know. So he goes from being a knight with Elizabeth to being beheaded by James the First later in England. So but he is the guy who was in charge of the lost colony, and they disappeared. So let's look at the tribes that existed when we started coming over here from Europe. These are only the tribes that were documented. There's probably hundreds of them that were not. So there's not one little baby tribe. It's lots and lots and lots of people, and some of these tribes had as many as we talked about 10,000 people. So this is a huge chunk of the world's population living on this continent. We just don't count them yet. Now let's take a look at this. You might have to run through it twice. Sometimes the start of it is kind of funky the way that it starts. But this is the land that it belonged to the Indians, and then slowly you see where it's green. That's where we're shoving them. So here, now watch it from here. All right, so here's all the tribes. Now they're green, and we're slowly removing the land as it turns white. There's no Indians allowed on it. So look at the final result. Here they are on reservations, and this is where they are today. So they started out with the entire continent, and they end up with these little teeny tiny places. And let me tell you, they are the worst places on the planet. I've been to a lot of them. There's nothing there. You got to Wyoming, and the reservations are literally on a cliff. There, you can't grow anything, you can't build anything. It's just absolutely ridiculous. So one more time, from the entire continent to the little teeny tiny reservations, just insane and barbaric. There you are. So, the aftermath of colonization, there are several things that we need to know about that. Of course, obviously, the Earth's population is going to be redistributed. In some cases, that's pretty evil, like the natives are going to be wiped out, maybe as much as 90% of them. So, the population here in North America and South America completely changed. It's not the natives anymore, it's white men. In Africa, the population redistribution is awful for them because they've had their biggest and brightest removed and brought to North and South America. Now, in Europe, the population shift was actually a good thing for most European places because you've drained that giant population from the cities that was causing problems after the Enclosure Act. You've solved the problem of primogeniture. So for them, it was a good thing. Now, let's look back at the natives. The loss of land and individuality for those native tribes is devastating. And of course, it's never going to be undone. It's just going to keep getting worse and worse and worse. And we'll talk about that a whole lot in the future lessons to come. We also have the first cases of chattel slavery. Chattel slavery is different in that slavery before that wasn't an ownership type of thing. If you have chattel slavery, then individuals are actually owned as property by somebody else. So the first chattel slavery, believe it or not, was Portugal. Portugal was the very first one to start doing that. And later Spain would get involved in it. Once they figured out that they could grow sugar in the Caribbean, the African population is going to be moved across the world to start taking care of those sugarcane populations in the Caribbean. So it's definitely going to change the world forever and forever. Okay, so this is the end of the first period and the end of Unit 2. So we are moving right along, and I'm sure that you are ready for the test that's going to happen shortly. Study, 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 study. If you did not watch that Popeye movie, please go back and watch it. There will be questions about it on the test. Okay, see you down the road.